Deputy Chief Johnny Adams, who has been ill this week, unfortunately. He won't be able to be with us, but Chief Thomas has. And Chief Thomas will be joined by the Director of the Counseling Center, Dr. Eileen Rosenstein. And I think that I have heard wonderful things about Chief Thomas. My interactions with him have led me to think this is the kind of person we want in law enforcement and on campuses, working with us and responding when there are situations that may call for a law enforcement response. So, Chief Thomas is going to speak for a few minutes. He will have time for questions, and then we will have a very short break before we start again at 1:30. So, Chief Thomas.
Welcome. And for those of you that are from places on the East Coast, I'll humor you by saying tomorrow we're expecting snow. If that makes you feel better. But the reality is this is pretty much life in Southern California. So give you guys a chance to thaw out a little bit. But I want to say welcome, and my fill-in, and I won't call her a fill-in because we work so collaboratively together on such a consistent and regular basis. Eileen Rosenstein, she is going to fill in for Deputy Chief Adams, who is under the weather. But we won't miss a beat because, again, the collaboration is that strong, and there's not much that's going to be much different from if Johnny Adams was here. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I've been at USC now a little bit under 8 years. Primarily, my law enforcement career has been in municipal law enforcement. I spent 21 years with the Los Angeles Police Department. Been at USC now about 7.5 years. Had one other campus law enforcement assignment at the University of District of Columbia, which was markedly different than USC. It was a small HBCU commuter campus, very much different. And I want to talk a little bit primarily about what I think is a model for other universities, other entities of collaboration. One of the things coming from a municipal background and working for the Los Angeles Police Department, when you talk about mental illness and law enforcement dealing with mentally ill individuals, I'll be the first to say, we don't always get it right, particularly on the municipal side. The dynamics and the criteria is definitely different. I like to think that, as a matter of fact, I know we do here at USC have a more holistic approach when it comes to dealing with issues of students that are going through issues of emotional, psychological, and other issues. But I also would caution those of you in the room, when you look at what's in place with most police departments around the country, it's definitely different. And one of the main criteria is the standards for what an officer, when they get that call that's dealing with an individual that's quote unquote has mental illness. And the dynamics for them fall in two categories. Is the individual a threat to himself or a threat to others? Markedly different from campus public safety. Our issues, yes, we are concerned somewhat with that, but we're more concerned with the student in its entirety. And here at USC, with what we have in place, with the crisis intervention teams that we have that fall under two categories, are student concerns meetings that we have that deal with the lower level issues, and then the threat assessment team that we have in place that deals with some of the higher level. But the reality is we don't look at them the same. The holistic approach, in my opinion, works much more, it solves the issues in a much more permanent manner. And I'll let Eileen speak a little bit from her perspective.
I think that it's real important to kind of recognize that on campuses there's a different expectation of the type of intervention than what it is in the community. And there's many people, particularly family members or roommates or whoever who may be frustrated, kind of saying, why can't you take care of this problem, so to speak, that's there. And that happens oftentimes in municipalities, that people are called in domestic violence issues, a whole bunch of things, and there's little that they can do. Here on a university campus, and it's not just our model, it's across the board, I think there's really a community of helpers that can come in and kind of say, okay, what needs to happen in this situation to decrease the risk and increase the protective factors so this student, as well as the community, all have a successful experience. And so I think that's been our approach, is like, okay, we do have to look at the whole piece that's there. And we've had numerous conversations from things like, when do you handcuff somebody? Think about this. You're somebody who is confused, you don't feel well, you're not sure what's going on, and is this who we want to, put in handcuffs? These are the major questions that we go, and because of our close working relationship on each of these different questions, when is a hospitalization appropriate? When is it okay to just return the person back to their residence? These are different. When does a family member or a concerned other needs to be brought in? So on a day-to-day basis, wouldn't you say, John?
Yeah, and even as simple, and it's got to be some give and take. It was Eileen who educated our department regarding the issues of handcuffing, and in my opinion, even in municipal, handcuffing is the officer's discretion. However, most officers will fall back on, well, for officer safety, we need to handcuff this individual. For those of us in this room, we know that that's probably oftentimes the worst thing that you can do. And one of the things that we've changed our policies is in all instances where there's a student involved, we will fall back on the input of Eileen and her staff based upon the relationship and the intervention and the counseling that they've done to give us, to determine for us whether or not it would be appropriate for us to handcuff. And most of the time it isn't, and again, it was discretionary to begin with, but officers will fall back on, well, the California Penal Code says that individuals that have mental illness or mentally unstable, you shall handcuff. Well, that is a very loose interpretation of the law. It is still always the officer's discretion, and we learned through working collaboratively with Eileen and her staff and the rest of the team at USC Student Affairs that they're in the best position to guide us as to what's most appropriate. And my position as chief is that in all instances we are going to follow their lead, and we will, to the degree we can, not handcuff an individual if we don't have to.
One of the things that the first question we'll ask is this a life-threatening situation? That's one of the first things, and we work hand in hand in that piece because there's a different movement. If it's life-threatening, what do I mean by that? Someone's on a ledge. In terms of that. We will try in terms of talking and making a connection, but the reality is we're going to try to hold that person and contain them back. That's the key there, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes you could talk about when you call LAPD, because there are people who are specialized and trained in this. So all of you, when you go back to your communities, who are these special people that you can bring in and do? And sometimes it's better not to bring in somebody else because you already have a relationship. You know who this person is who's going. So the life-threatening is a major question in these critical incidents experiences, because if it's life-threatening, that changes the dynamic, because what you're there is to save life. Afterwards, you can kind of figure out what's the next steps and how to repair if there's been a rupture with the person. And also try to kind of contain the feelings of fear, safety, in some way slow it all down. But once you go past the immediate life-threatening piece, then we have time.
Yeah, you definitely do. And back a little bit to the piece where for those of you that you have to call in the municipality, also just be very, very mindful. And to the degree that you can have a working relationship with the municipality, because, again, their interpretation and their guidelines are going to be very, very black and white. And, one of the things that we've done is bring in LAPD, their SMART team, and their mental evaluation folks to understand what's the mission and what are we trying to do holistically for our students and those here at USC. And the reality is it makes their job much easier. Municipalities, for the most part, and I'll use the example of LAPD because I'm most familiar with, again, there's not a lot of training that municipal officers get in this area. You don't get much training in the academy regarding dealing with individuals that are mentally ill. If that were not the case, you wouldn't have the majority of the mentally ill in Los Angeles living in Skid Row, unfortunately. But the reality is there's not a lot of training. The responses of the municipal agency is going to be very different and dynamic, different based upon different dynamics than what you can create. And that's the whole goal, is to create something that's suited and more responsive and more along the lines of the missions of your organization. And I can tell you, the municipal agencies would value this input. They would value the training for the most part, because again, this is not something most officers are equipped to deal with effectively. Basically, they're looking at the next call. LAPD has gotten better, but it's only been as a result of the consent decree. The consent decree that directed LAPD to do certain things also covered how they would respond and what would be put in place when dealing with mentally ill, because as an agency did not get it right for many, many years.
And I want to add on also not just the person who is kind of struggling, but being on a college campus, it often affects a whole bunch of people around. And sometimes really explain to people, no, it's like in some ways reassuring them it's okay even in the middle of the crisis, and how they can be helpful is really useful, because people want to be helpful. They want to know what to do in these kind of situations in terms of that. And sometimes it's very difficult, like in a classroom, somebody is getting very agitated. There's a question like, do we call the police or not? What do we do? And so oftentimes, in those questions, we do trainings with faculty and staff about how to handle a classroom situation, and also with our police force kind of working together, and also with LAPD, by the way. We do have trainings. I just got another invitation this week. So I'm aware of the time. I'm wondering if it'd be helpful if we open up to some questions to people. Do people have particular questions in terms of how things have happened on either your campuses? But I do think there's a difference on campuses how people intervene. And the more training we work and more collaboratively we work in terms of this, it really helps the student not to be fearful. We try most often to have people to go voluntarily into the hospital versus being committed, but there are times that commitment does make sense. That's there. We're very lucky here at USC where we're developing that we can do the commitment procedures through Skype with a hospital to see if the hospital sees the person at that level. So the student doesn't have to go wait, and our police force doesn't have to go wait in the hospital ER for 6 or 7 hours, which I don't know if any of you had that experience, that either a counselor has to do that or the student has to sit there, and it's not appropriate. And by that time, they're getting even more agitated because they're sitting there rather than sitting down and go, okay, what are our options here? I see a question back there.
Yes. We're here with a community college, and in our setting we do have a police force available, and we're part of the behavior intervention team. So one of the biggest concerns that we have is there's some of us that are licensed, that are mandated reporters, and there are some people, most people, who aren't. And considering the fact that we don't have a lot of under 18 in terms of our population, what is the faculty and staff responsibility in terms of reporting? And if there's, for example, a student is suicidal in their classroom, says they want to do something, has a plan, but they're not a mandated reporter.
Right. Okay. So we're not talking about sexual assault here. We're talking about, let's say, someone not, feeling well, depressed, whatever it might be, and the person's over 18. So we'll just make it easy in your question. So the first thing is, it's really developing a culture of care. So it's not always easy, especially in a community mental health, community college, where some people may teach part-time, they may not, in terms of that, and don't have the same kind of training that's there. But it's really important to go out and to really teach caring. That as a community, for a student to succeed, there needs to be care. So when someone says something like, "I'm not well," this needs to be taken seriously. And there has been a couple of precedents in terms of legal suits, etc., that have said, look, if someone says something, we know you can't save everybody, but we want you at least to try. The expectation is to try, in terms of that. And that might sound horrible that that's the piece, but really, again, because oftentimes, think about it, it's difficult if you don't know what to do, if this is not in and out, it's difficult. How do you approach someone even to say, I think Evan said it beautifully today, when his friend said to him, maybe you should go for help, and Evan got insulted, like, I can take care of myself, man. That's not unusual. So it's hard for people to approach somebody. But I think what's important is that all of the members of a community, staff, faculty, administrators, we all stand there and say, hey, let's find out what's going on. Can you wait to the end of the class? Do we need to call someone now for you? What's that there? Through Virginia Tech, and I don't like using this because remember, we rarely have violence with people who have mental illness. And I hate that that gets equated because that's just not true in terms of the equation that's there. But we also have behaviors that happen that we have to be careful about. So in that, to answer the point, is the school needs to put out publications, what to do when you're concerned. There was Cornell has put out a wonderful book that kind of does that. USC has something on the websites. These are things that you can share, look through, copy, and put on your websites because people want to know what to do. They have someone they're concerned about, they're not sure what it is. So does that help?
One thing I would add to what Eileen said is, and it's one of the things I think that USC we do pretty well, is we have a process in place to look at and capture those precursors. There's a weekly meeting, student concerns meeting, every Tuesday. And most people would think, well, geez, that's pretty frequently. But you'd be surprised how often some of the little minor issues, it may come in the form of a student concerned about another student that, in that room on Tuesdays, there's a representative from my department, there's Eileen's there's someone from Student Res Ed, all the places potentially where information like a suicidal student may come to the forefront. And then in that room, we start looking at who's best suited to reach out to this student? Is it something that's occurring in the classroom? Is this student having academic issues? Is this student on the Department of Public Safety radar? Have we had numerous run-ins with this student? So we started looking at it well in advance. So hopefully by the time it gets to that level, we would collectively all be aware of exactly that this student is having some issues.
And I do recommend that each university has a central place to report people. And again, this is not for punitiveness. It's not a punitive process. It's like, okay, boy, this person's 3 times has been found sleeping all around campus in different places. Has anyone gone up and asked this person, are you homeless or do you need help? because we don't want people to fall through the cracks. That's the point, that someone is paying attention. Yeah. I saw another hand for a question.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Skype arrangement that you had and how you facilitated communication with the officer?
Michelle, do you want to? This is our person who's been arranging this. So.
Well, sort of. I'm Michelle Morgan. I work with Eileen in the Counseling Center as part of the crisis intervention team. How this got started, and we're in the very beginning stages of it. I had worked inpatient in different facilities in Glendale and Pasadena. At Los Encinas Hospital in Pasadena, they started a program with Cedars-Sinai after their psych unit closed to facilitate more effective and safe holds that were being written in the emergency room. And when I was working at the hospital, I asked, could we get in on that? Is there a possibility that we could do something like that in the counseling center? And so that started the conversation. And Eileen has been talking with folks to try to get all of the other procedures in place here for the university.
Because you have to do like paperwork and kind of have legal go through it and who's responsible for what. There's all that kind of piece. But the wonderful piece about these kind of new technologies that we're looking at is it really helps the student in a way that we're getting multiple opinions and then can speak to the student and say, okay, this is an option, this is an option, this is an option. Where do you want to go with this? Because other times just sending someone to an ER, I don't know how, you don't have to raise your hands, but I don't know about the rest of you. You could sit there for a long time, and especially our students, because they tend to look good. They'll even be looking like they're reading their homework, which they may not be understanding at all, but they look pretty good. So they may be held in an ER for a really long time because they don't look urgent in any way. So if you want more information, we can talk about it and how to do that. But I think these are going to be new initiatives that are happening kind of all over. And the good news is that people who really specialize on this and that our police force doesn't have to make these decisions, you know, in terms of that, of just because oftentimes that's been, you know, traumatic. Someone gets taken to the hospital by the police, then the psychiatrist sees them within 24 hours. They say, no, they're fine, they're let go. But they've just had this whole thing that they've been taken away from school, you know, and there's little kind of discussion of like, okay, what really needs to happen now? They just get released back into the community without, yeah.
And that's a game changer for law enforcement to be able to Skype and minimize that time. And one of the main reasons most municipal officers avoid dealing with anything having to do with mentally ill is because it takes so much time. It is a very long process, just from the standpoint of even getting someone out to do the assessment.
Mm-hmm. You had a question?
I have two questions. You're using the term crisis intervention. So I have two questions. You're using the term crisis intervention team, and I'm wondering if you are talking about the Memphis model of CIT and having the police officers on campus trained with that particular crisis intervention model. That's one question. And then the second question is related to the life of a student and how students really feel connected to and a part of the campus life, and even their schoolwork. So much so that when they are struggling, and I think Evan gave good examples of it, it's still about, no, I got to go do my homework, or no, I really got to attend to this or what have you, and folks aren't really doing well. And when I was in graduate school at Case Western Reserve University, they had this really cool thing where I was, feeling suicidal, and I let my resident assistant know. So one, I'd like to know training of resident assistants. I let my resident assistant know I just really wasn't doing well, but I didn't want to go anywhere because I really wanted to do my homework. I mean, so on one hand, I want to kill myself, and on one hand, I want to do my homework. It's a little weird, but that's what was going on, right? So this idea of being removed from the community was actually much more harmful to my quote-unquote recovery than being able to stay in the community. So what Case Western did is they set aside what was called a six-pack, or kind of the dorm situation where there's 6 rooms around a common room, and it was kind of like a respite place where students could go. There was a social worker worker on 24 hours who could be with the student, talk with the student. You could bring your homework, leave your homework, what have you. And they had one on each side of campus because it was 2 different sides of campus. So if you were on south, you would go to north. If you were on north, you would go to south. So you felt like you went someplace different, but you were still on campus. And I thought that was really, really phenomenal. And it actually did keep me out of the hospital. It kept me connected to my schoolwork. I didn't worry about falling behind. It was superb. So I'm wondering if there are any other models like that. Sorry, I asked a lot of questions. My bad.
So, which one do you want to take?
Well, I'll speak basically from the standpoint of student concerns. Our whole focus is getting the student back on track academically. So in every way, our strategies are designed for that. And as a last result, even when the student has to be removed from the campus community and have to stop their classes, it's always with the intent of the student getting well and getting back on track, taking a break and coming back. So in every way. And then the other thing is maintaining the contact with the student despite. And I think that's another thing that through the student concerns process, the student never feels really disconnected from his academic track and the university as a whole.
Unfortunately, because of the time, we'll have to wrap up, but there are many universities that have even infirmary still, if that does that. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing many students not go into hospitals is just for the reasons you say, that they don't want to miss, or they feel responsible, they have research they have to complete, or so oftentimes counseling centers are now choosing to see people on a daily basis just to get to the stabilization piece, so they don't have to go and get hospitalized in those patients. There's so many things we could say, but we're just so glad that we have this time with you, and thank you. And if you have extra questions.
Yeah, if you have questions, feel free.
Okay, thanks.